Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Story number 1. Behind the Kindest of Faces, written by Teller of Tall Tales. Behind the kindest of faces humanity gives lies a monster. You may not believe me, after all. How could your jovial physician or baker be a monster when they are always so kind and considerate? I can only tell you through a story, a memory, really, seared into my mind. The memory of a kind-faced monster named Jay. Jay was a great friend of mine, a hulking 6.5-foot tower of piercings and muscle that was as soft-mannered and as kind as a Solarian. I'd bared witness to his selflessness. Every day, we'd meet for his daily walk of the less fortunate neighborhoods. Even struggling himself with keeping a roof over his head and food on his table, he walked up to the most dilapidated buildings to knock and ask if they needed anything. So many were grateful to this gentle giant that unflinchingly brought hundreds of credits worth of groceries for those who only knew him as the blue-haired human. He volunteered his time to his community, cleaning the streets, helping at the local holo library when they were short-staffed, reading to the young at the daycare, and sitting as still as a statue when one of the fitful sleepers found a place to rest peacefully in his lap. He brought meals and company to the elderly and alone, those who might not remember or care enough to eat. I never questioned how he could afford the time or the credits to do it all, until the day he showed me what he hid behind that kind smile. I was there to pick him up after his shift at the daycare, just stepping out of my hovercraft when a Zelexian came sprinting out of the daycare, its 8 spindly legs scurrying rapidly as it carried a kicking, screaming Gorvian child in its manipulator arms. I was stunned, frozen in my spot at the blatant kidnapping. The blue-haired blur in pursuit wasn't so hesitant. Jade's face was twisted in an expression of pure malice, the thick, stocky legs pistoning up and down as he closed the gap. The Zelaxian had closed the door to their hovercraft when Jay smashed into it shoulder first, buckling the aluminium door inwards slightly as he bounced off. He was bleeding from his scalp, bright crimson dripping down his face and tinged his blue brow purple. Jay let out a monstrous snarl as he grabbed onto the hovercraft's outer handles, pulling himself on top of the now powered-on vehicle that was slowly lifting itself slightly off the ground. Through the shattered, Jay's right arm reared back as he stared through the shatter-resistant front glass of the vehicle. I thought to myself, there was no way he was going to try punching through the synthetic metallo quartz. He didn't try. He did! With an almighty crack, his knuckles smashed into the front windscreen, cracks spidering out from where his fist had hit as the hovercraft lurched forward. He drew his fist back again. I could see his hand was mangled, the skin split open along the knuckles showing white bone. But he slammed it forward again, punching through the weakened windscreen and pushing his arm deeper inside, the metallocords digging into and cutting his flesh before he yanked it back. The spider-like Zerlexian was screaming as they were pulled through the mostly shattered glass and thrown to the ground as the hovercraft floated to a stop. They tried to scramble to their many legs, but Jay jumped on them, landing feet first on the delicate legs with a sickening snap. The Zelaxian looked up at Jay in fear as Jay glared down at the spidery creature. There was no kindness in those eyes as he extended one of his fingers on his non-mangled hand, pointing at the Zelaxian and speaking in a tone that was cold as dry ice. "I should kill you. I should rip you limb from limb and wipe my hands clean of it." That terrifying dead stare as the words hung in the air. Jay crouched down and hoisted the Zelaxian up by their robe's collar so they were face to multi-eyed face. "Feel lucky I don't want to traumatize the children. They'd never forget the sight of your guts strung across the parking lot. But I would. I'd go home happy knowing I took a useless predator like yourself out of the gene pool and sleep like a dead in the grave. Feel lucky, punk." Then, with a sharp jerk of his hand and head, Jay headbutted the Zelaxian and knocked him out cold before the look of concern became etched on his face as he dropped the Zelaxian and ran to the beat-up hovercraft. Climbing onto the hood, he leaned through the shattered windscreen and gingerly lifted the sobbing Gorvan child from the hovercraft. Sitting on the hood and cradling the child with his good arm, mangled hand hanging at his side as a soft, relieved smile came on his face. Quietly, able to move, I ran over to Jay, still in my nurse's uniform, unable to believe that he was so calm with such grievous injuries. "Jay, what happened? He shushed me, gesturing at the child now asleep in his arms. "Be quiet. This one's gonna need some rest. Also, call the authorities for the useless lump on the ground there." He nodded at the just now waking up and whimpering Zelaxian. I couldn't peel my eyes from his splayed arm. Then I noticed the other injuries. A tear in his shirt hidden by his apron, but just below his armpit, matted with red and bleeding profusely. The cut in his scalp, a lot more jagged and deep than I'd thought. Several fingers on his left hand were bent at odd angles, one eye nearly swollen shut with a bruise. "Jay, what happened? Who are you?" I had already dialed the authorities on my check-com, but I could only think about the human in front of me. Tan face getting paler and paler as bright crimson leaked onto the hovercraft's hood. Jay gave a bloodied smile before softly saying, "I protected the kids. They got me good, but I protected the kids. That's all that matters." I couldn't respond as I watched the light slowly fade from those clear grey eyes. He was gone before I could respond. The child in his lifeless arms still sound asleep as the sound of sirens approached. My vision blurred as I fell to my knees, my voice fading me as I tried to shake my human friend awake. I couldn't feel anything as I stood by Jay's casket, his weeping mother next to me as I stared at the peaceful, slightly smiling face. He looked like he was sleeping, but I knew he wasn't. He died in that parking lot on the hood of the hovercraft with the child he'd given his life for. He didn't die alone, though. I hadn't seen it, but according to the news, there had been 4 bodies inside the daycare. 4 hulking Traxians, reptilian-born and bred for war. Jay had taken them on alone, even after he was stabbed in the heart from behind. I let myself cry as the somber congregation watched Jay's casket get closed and lowered into the cold earth. I slowly made my way to the lectern, looking out blankly at the crowd of mourners. I found myself unable to read the speech I'd written on my note cards. Instead, I gazed at the blue jay gazing at me sternly from a branch. An old saying of Jay's entering my mind. "I'm not a good man. I'm just a man that does good things. Behind my smile, I'm just an animal like the rest of us. A monster with morals, looking to make my little corner of the galaxy a little bit better." He always said that when I asked him why, he was always so kind. But there's a part that I didn't let the audience hear. Every day I wake up hoping to have died in my sleep, Skim, but until that time comes, I'll help whoever I can, whenever I can, so that I can prove to myself I'm not a monster in a man's skin. You were a monster, Jay. Behind your kind face stood the best kind of monster, the one evil fears. End of story. Story number 2. Final exam, written by Kaiser5243. The other students had all left muttering about being legally allowed to leave after 15 minutes had passed with no sign of our professor, leaving me alone outside the locked classroom door. Looking through the small window, I could see papers laid out on desks, which must have been our human psychology finals. But after another 5 minutes, there was still no sign of the strange human that taught the class. Perhaps the others were right and something had happened. Was I simply living up to the stereotype often placed on my species of just being a big dumb brute, too stupid to understand what was going on? Maybe I was better off doing what they said, forget this whole dream and go back home to be a soldier. It's not like I was a great student and my parents constantly said I was wasting my time. No, I had worked too hard and put up with too much to let it end like this. Look at the brute! Do you think he can read? I bet he passes because the professors are too scared of him to fail him. 4 years of constant mocking, not one creature believing in me, but there I stood on my own, working harder than most other races needed to, just to barely pass, only to be stopped at the finish line by a locked door. I refused to let this be the end. The door exploded inward with a single kick, splinters falling through the air as I ducked through the doorway, a growl rumbling through my chest, stomping through the room to my desk. A familiar voice called out behind me. "Excuse me, young man. Why did you kick in my door?" I spun around to find the professor sitting calmly behind a desk out of view of the door window. Instead of the shock or fear I'd grown used to from other beings on campus, he simply seemed excited. Caught off guard, I stood there staring blankly for a few seconds before looking over to the rubble sheepishly. "I need to pass this class to graduate. I worked too hard to let you or some stupid doll stop me." He just laughed, clapping his hands together. "Now that is a human answer. Congratulations, you are the first to pass my final. There's a broom in the closet. Clean this mess up and I'll see you at graduation." End of story. I would quickly like to thank our Tier 5 patrons and channel members: Casper Arnholt, Cam Maxwell, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Arishakal, Dragzoon WRE, and Arcadian. Thank you very much.